Welcome, low ego action heroes. This is Debbie Levitt from deltacx.com, and I'm back with another episode today, specially timed one to accommodate our super friend and guest of the show, Dr. Seth Finkle. We are here to talk about critical thinking. What is it? How are you doing it? When are you not doing it? And how can you do it better? So this is part of our series. It'll end up in the playlist on psychology stuff. And let's see, what else can I tell you? Join live and ask your questions. I'm watching the LinkedIn chat and the YouTube chat, which reminds me to set up the YouTube chat. Kayleen and Charlene are already here. They're our most fantastic low ego action hero friends. So on that note, I'm going to get everything cooking and bring in our guest so he can spell his name and introduce himself. Dr. Seth, won't you please spell your name and introduce yourself?
I would be happy to do both. So I am Dr. Seth Finkle. My first name is S-E-T-H. My last name is F like Frank, N like Nancy, K-L-E.
You forgot the
I am
I.
a clinical...
F-I-N.
Oh my gosh.
And I thought I was sleeping.
Name.
Yeah.
Can we do this again? F-I-N-K-L-E.
And take two.
And scene. I am a clinical and school psychologist in Lehigh Valley, Pennsylvania, United States of America, and working in the Allentown City School District by day and teaching at Moravian College by evening.
With a heart of gold.
And with a heart of gold, and it's great to be back.
Yeah, thanks for coming back. And so this time I wanted to talk about critical thinking because it's something that pops up from time to time. And I have so many examples of things to me that are and are not critical thinking. And of course, now I forgot them. But I wanted to start with a softball for you, which is, for the people who might be watching, how would a psychologist define critical thinking?
It depends on the psychologist.
All right, I'm going to pick you.
Okay, how would I define it? That's a whole different thing. There are so many things that encompass critical thinking and so many different ways of defining it. We could spend the whole hour just talking about that, but of course we won't. In a nutshell, critical thinking is a kind of clear, reflective, reasonable thought process that's focused on deciding what to believe or what to do. That's the gist of it. It's asking all kinds of probing questions like, how do we know this? And why does this happen? And what are the alternatives to this? Or is it true in every case or just this instance? And it incorporates our whole life experience. It's not just a thing we do or a cap we put on occasionally that's got mouse ears on it. It's a thing that we do all the time.
We should.
At least I hope we do. We should,
yeah.
Right? A thing that it's a generalized way of thinking as opposed to a kind of a specific domain area that we work on.
Okay, so let me jump into some territory I didn't totally prepare you for. Sorry about that. But I find that in our world in UX, there are lots of people who rise up as kind of gurus and pseudo-gurus. And I think some of them are absolutely full of poop. And I've noticed that when those people speak or write, people just seem to accept whatever they say. Like there's something about that charismatic speaker or charismatic leader that makes people not really stop and say, that person just said we should eat babies. Like I should really think twice about that one. Or, oh, he's such a great speaker. He's wonderful. Well, what did you like about what he said? Like, oh, I don't know. It was funny. And I go, well, he just said everyone's a designer and that everyone at the company should be a designer. And he's going to come to your company and teach everybody to do your job. Wouldn't that be a bad outcome for you? Oh, gee, I don't know. I hadn't thought about that. What is it about some charismatic people that seems to turn our critical thinking off?
Right. Such a great question. I read it's an article, it's maybe a few years old now, from Neuron called The Need for Critical Thinking in UX. And it specifically gives some great examples of these, like very specific statements like, and these might be passé by now because this is 2018, but things like, if it needs an instruction manual, it's probably not a good user experience.
That's true.
Um, and the response to that was, what if it was a Boeing 747? Like arguably, it's conditional upon things, right? Some things probably need a little more explanation, and that's appropriate to the thing. Or another one was, without data, you're just another opinion. And that's true for sure, but it's only partly true. The author goes on to say that, what if the opinion is coming from, say, Steven Spielberg or J.J. Abrams or someone, and they're talking about a screenplay you've written, and they tell you it's not very good? It's
Right.
just an opinion, but it's an opinion that's based on a whole lot of stuff. So these broad generalizations from people in influencers, people who have a voice that's being heard widely. I'm not sure how much of it has to do with the person, the charismatic speaker, and how much of it has to do with the fact that we are in we're in kind of a tunnel, and people tend to hear each other's voices echoing like crazy, and that echo chamber effect tends to give things a level of credibility that sometimes they don't deserve. The idea that random things go viral, whether they're sensible or not, and it's hard to tell exactly what makes something, what gives something that kind of lasting power and what doesn't. But I agree with you, some level of charisma does, and some people just have it. They speak with a kind of authority that they could be saying complete gibberish, total nonsense, or at least things that are only partly true, and people buy it right on the surface of it. And that's partly about the speaker, and it's partly about us listeners. Most people don't engage our critical analytic thinking when we're listening to someone who's seemingly trustworthy. We typically want something to be easier to digest, and so we just buy it.
And I tend to think, I mean, I'm no expert, but I tend to think of critical thinking as when we question things and don't just take things at face value. And especially when we think about possible outcomes and play out multiple possible outcomes, not just what if everything went right, but what are all of these possible outcomes? What are all the possible outcomes of everyone at your company's a UX designer? There are lots of possible outcomes there, and most of them are bad. Do you have other definitions or a better definition of how do I know when I'm engaging in critical thinking versus not doing it?
Right. Well, here's a few verbs we can kind of kick around. So, questioning is definitely a piece of it. Listening, really listening, and actually hearing what people are saying and thinking about, contemplating, interpreting, evaluating, trying to understand the significance or the meaning of the information and trying to judge its value or its credibility. That's definitely a piece of this process. It's an active rather than a passive listening process. And you're also doing these kind of higher order thought processes of analysis and integration and connection, where you're breaking down information into its components and combining those and interchanging them in some way and trying to work with those things actively. And you're also using logic, which is one place where things break down significantly. And so we see all kinds of potential difficulties in reasoning, drawing inferences based on available evidence using logic that actually makes sense, as opposed to something that sounds vaguely semi-logical until you realize that it's completely false. There's so many logical fallacies that we struggle with as a species all the time, and it just clouds our thinking constantly.
I'm trying to find one that someone sent me yesterday. It was so banana pants crazy. Hold on, I think I screenshot it on my phone. This was somebody who could really stand to listen to this episode, but won't. So Yes, I ended up in a LinkedIn fight with someone who was for design thinking, and you may or may not have heard somewhere along the way that I'm against design thinking. And they decided that I didn't understand design thinking, and I was just invalidating it because I didn't understand it. But where it gets interesting, and I think relevant to our conversation, is to kind of my segue into logical fallacies and things like that. Because her response, now that was bad enough that she had assigned those things to me I couldn't make sense of it, and I was just invalidating it. And then she wrote, but that leaves a very narrow definition of what works and what doesn't. And if that perspective were held across other areas, then physics, math, philosophy, economics, modern technology wouldn't exist. Because people don't understand how they work. And so because she has decided that I couldn't understand design thinking and I invalidated it, the next logical step was, well, then we've got nothing. There's no math.
And then dogs and cats living together. Mass hysteria.
Right. Then the earth cooled, and then the dinosaurs died.
Exactly.
I know what you're doing.
Exactly.
Yeah. And
I know you caught that. Yeah.
I had to screenshot that. I was like, what just happened here? And I think that that's a good example of not critical thinking. Oh, thank you, Charlene.
So nice.
Oh my gosh, look at this insane. I've got to fix that. That's a little bit too many emojis. I have to turn down that setting, I think.
That's really intense.
Yeah, that was for £1 British pound. So thank you, Charlene. Wow. That was £1 British pound. And I don't know if people like that. We could see a few more British pounds.
That's a pretty solid ROI right there.
I thought that there would just be a cute thing dropping into the cup, but wow, that was spectacular. Thank you. So Solomon's got a neat question that I'll answer in a moment, but I want to, Charlene wrote, this episode requires a coin. Well, thank you for the British pound. So I think one thing we can say is when people are not engaging in critical thinking, we will hopefully very often catch them with these logical fallacies and exaggerations. Can you tell us some of the things we might see in people maybe when they're not engaging in critical thinking?
Oh yeah. So there's so many different flavors of ways in which this process breaks down. We've got like a whole glossary of terms, but I'll give you just a couple that I think are sort of interchanged a lot, but they're actually slightly different and nuanced in terms of how there's so many different ways we mess this up. So bias is one that you guys know well, right?
We're supposed
UX
to.
talks about bias all the time. Confirmation bias and bandwagon effects and halo effects and all these heuristics and attribution errors and all this sort of thing. So these kind of systematic unconscious errors in judgment that we have all the time, just by virtue of being humans and having human DNA, we have these implicit biases, which is different than, related to, but different than logical fallacies. So errors in logic or reasoning. So we could teach a whole course at this point on logic, based solely on so distracting. Based solely
I have to turn down this setting. I'm totally embarrassed.
Really
Thank
fantastic.
you, Solomon. Thank you, Solomon,
That's
for
wonderful.
the $5. It's in the
wonderful.
cup. I'm going to open up the settings right now. I'm so sorry.
Well, you do that. So we could probably go on social media right now, on any platform of social media, just on the comments section of any major news outlet in the world, and teach a whole course on logical fallacies, because
Sure.
And there's hundreds and hundreds of them. If you look up the different like lists of logical fallacies, there's like 30 pages worth of different kinds of ways in which logic breaks down. So that's a whole nother thing. There's cognitive errors, which sound like the same thing, but in fact, they're only marginally related. These are issues of things like probability, where we over or underestimate things, or we fail to seriously consider all the relevant possibilities. So there's these kinds of errors of omission and commission that happen. And then in the clinical world, we have cognitive distortions, which are kind of these deep-seated errors in our thinking and our reasoning that are the result of, or are sometimes the defining characteristic of, some psychopathological issues or psychological disorders. Things like black and white, all or nothing thinking, or denial, or things like that. So there's just so many different ways. And to your question of how do you spot this? Where's the detector? What's the giveaway, the tell that tells us that someone's doing it? It comes back to listening. It comes back to listening critically. If you're listening critically, you'll catch people who aren't, because eventually it'll start flashing like a big, like someone just, donated money to you. You'll have these like icons everywhere floating around on your screen telling you something's wrong here. And you'll normally start laughing at it because it's ridiculous. Sometimes it's frustrating. Sometimes it's hilarious. But oftentimes I think you have some kind of emotional response to it because it's so jarring to our way of thinking about things. It doesn't make any sense. But the person who said it doesn't normally see it.
Right, and I was going to say, I think this almost ends up a little bit in our gaslighting world, because I think with the way that person addressed me, it's designed for me to immediately feel defensive. And instead of saying like, but no, I don't think this, and I think that, that's the game they want us to get sucked into. But I think we have to try to stay focused and not react. I want to jump into some of the chat and the questions, because the chat is going crazy over the emote explosions, which I have toned down.
Before you do, can I hit one thing on this, because I'm going to forget
Please,
otherwise. But
yes.
I think it's important to note that there's a lot of different motives behind this, and for some people it's truly unconscious. They don't know they're doing it. And for other people, it's very much a conscious manipulation, that they are playing with half-truths and with sort of semi-logical statements as a way of trying to manipulate people's perception. And that's a very different, the feeling is the same and the words are the same, but I think the motive behind it can be very, very different. And our response to it probably ought to be very different as a result when it's intentional versus unintentional.
Thank you. Let's jump into some things in the chat that are not about the emoji explosion, which I have dialed. I have dialed down in the settings. I'll see if that helps. If anyone dares to donate again, and thank you, everyone knows I take your donations and buy delicious cheese. So Solomon says, and I definitely want to handle. I've got a story to answer this one. Isn't design thinking a rebrand of critical thinking? Now, I'm assuming he's asking that seriously and not just trying to wind me up. So, there's a story I tell in my book that I think will address that. And that is when I was researching for my book, I found a guy who had written an article online about how great design thinking was. And he came from an agency. And his story was, in short, that, for example, let's say a client comes to his agency and who's a bike company and says, we need a redesigned bike part. He says, well, in the old days, my agency would just redesign their bike part because that's what they asked for. But thanks to design thinking, now we can go through the design thinking process and maybe learn that this client doesn't need a redesigned bike part. Maybe they actually need a whole new product line. Maybe they need something else. And what I wrote in my book was, that's not design thinking, that's critical thinking. Because the way design thinking is structured, hypothetically, you could empathize with the users who would prefer a new bike part. You could end up designing and building that bike part anyway, because you could imagine the people who want that bike part. You wouldn't necessarily say, hold on, are we sure we really need that bike part? And to me, that's critical thinking, going, wait a minute, and so it's a key part of what we're supposed to do, but I don't believe it's baked into design thinking, because there could be someone out there who says, oh yeah, people would love a redesigned bike part. Let's just give them that.
So I'm gonna take a moment and try to play with the language of UX, which is a new thing for me. So bear with me if I'm getting it wrong, but it seems like it has something to do with the distinction between outcomes and deliverables. That you can produce something and give someone that deliverable and still not actually do anything useful. You've simply just gone through the motions and you've done something iterative and now they've got it. But you haven't actually transformed something in some meaningful way because you haven't applied that critical thought process. The critical thought process is necessary to transcend producing widgets and actually taking it to actually doing something that's going to improve someone's experience.
Yeah, the main phrase you'll hear over and over from people in Agile is outcomes over outputs. Because some people who care about what you're just saying are saying like, well, great, we made a thing, but was that the right thing? Now we have to see what the outcomes were. So yes, I do want to see more critical thinking in a lot of our worlds. Ooh, we have a nice question from Ekening, Ekening, you're not in YouTube as usual. It says, thinking in first principles has been my main focus for the last few weeks. I find that my instincts always kick in first, naturally. So my question is, how do I strike a balance between thinking in first principles and remaining intuitive? Are you hip to the whole first principles thing, which has grown in popularity after Elon Musk said that's like his bag?
I think I get the basic gist of it.
I will
The
give it a
sound of
quick
it is
Google.
that from the outset, starting the process of thinking and being methodical and planful, as opposed to just kind of being more intuitive and creative.
Let's
If I'm
see,
following the question.
Wikipedia says first principle is a basic proposition or assumption that cannot be deduced from any other proposition or assumption. Well, that sounds, let's see, another webpage says first principles thinking is one of the best ways to reverse engineer complicated problems and unleash creative possibility. Sometimes called reasoning from first principles, the idea is to break down complicated problems into basic elements and then reassemble them from the ground up. So Ekening's question was, how do I strike a balance between that and being intuitive?
Right. That's a really good question. I don't know that there's a sort of a sensible canned answer that I can give that doesn't sound like me just blathering on about it, because it's really a philosophical question. I don't know that there's a tactical answer to this in terms of here's what you do. You follow these 4 easy steps and you'll be able to stay balanced. I think the goal of being able to balance being methodical and planful from the ground up and building a solid foundation and then building on top of that, as opposed to being more intuitive or even whimsical at times, I think both are important. And I think the balance is you have to read yourself and you have to monitor yourself and your thought process. If you're finding yourself sitting there with 10,000 spreadsheets and you're getting really bored, I think that's a pretty good indication that you're flying too far to the left. And I think if you're feeling like you're flying by the seat of your pants and you're really not sure what the heck you're doing and you're not sure where this is going and what the next steps should be, it's possible that you're going a little too far into the intuition zone. But honestly, I think it's really a matter of you just kind of feel it in your gut. And I think you listen to your own, you monitor yourself, look at your own work output and see if it's working. If it's working, I would say you're balanced.
Yeah, keep us posted, Ekening. We've got a couple of fun comments from Solomon after the emoji explosion. Solomon says, I have a theory that it would not go well with stakeholders to have a critical thinking session or workshop, not trolling, I swear. I believe you. Well, look, we know that design thinking is very trendy right now. I don't see why critical thinking can't be trendy. And I say, let's challenge ourselves. We should challenge ourselves to, I mean, hypothetically, a critical thinking workshop is a brainstorming workshop. We're looking for fresh angles and fresh ways. Design thinking is supposed to do that, but sometimes doesn't understand the problem well enough to attack that. So let's see. Solomon also said, I'm not a psych expert, but I suspect most people assume they're critical thinkers and would find it rude to hold them hostage to have a session about it. Okay,
Yeah.
let's get into that a little bit. This probably comes a little bit into the world we've seen more and more of about alternative truths and fake news and which truth is true. And I
Mm-hmm.
think at the same time, we find a lot of people think they're critical thinkers and they think they're, empathetic and compassionate. Is there a way that we can recognize? I mean, we certainly can't go up to someone and be like, you're not a critical thinker, you're a jerk. But even if we just have that conversation in our own head, when can we recognize when someone is not using their critical thinking?
Right. So it's interesting. I being someone who doesn't work in the world of broadly saying engineering or production of or design of things, I'm not into the creation of stuff most of the time. I'm into science. I'm a scientist for the most part. I'm also a clinical practitioner and an educator, but all of that stuff boils down to science. And I think of myself as a scientist first. And the scientific method has a number of suppositions built into it that are radically different from what I'm hearing in terms of the attitudes of people who are kind of the big shots in the world of design. Because design is all about, presumably, sure, could be about having a lot of confidence in my ideas and my visions and my kind of project and what I'm going to be doing with that project. And confidence would be an asset. It's not to say that it's not, or that it's a liability as a scientist, but you always have to be skeptical, especially about your own stuff. You have to be your biggest critic, and you have to essentially disprove your own work all the time, or at least attempt to. And
I
your good
like that.
days are when you can't. When you can't disprove it, then you can feel solid about it. But from a first principle perspective, right? The first principles of science are, from the beginning of anything, you have to assume you're wrong. You have to assume the null hypothesis, that you are incorrect about everything that you have in mind. And then you go about testing that. And that is a humbling thing that's built into the work that we do. That you, again, there's arrogant scientists out there who don't do that. But I would say, for me, if I'm working in my field and I hear someone telling me this is how things are, and I'm 100% sure of it, I immediately know they're full of crap, because there is no such thing in science. That's not what we do. We want to try to, exactly what Kayleen is saying here, right? You're trying to overturn your ideas and hope that you fail. But frankly, if you don't fail, that's good too. It's the process that's important. So from my point of view, one thing that I think would be deeply unpopular in your line of work would be for people to then explain, as an exercise, why their idea is going to fail. Like, start with that. Start with, here's the reasons why this is a bad idea. But also, here's the reasons why I think it might really be a good idea. And let's take those two things and work with them simultaneously and see where that gets us. But you have to be prepared to debate both sides of the issue. Or here's some alternative ways of doing it that might be just as good as my idea. That kind of, it's not about democratizing it or asking other people. It's about taking in the idea that my one way of viewing this, my one point of view, is not, it's not reality with a capital R. there's a lot of possibilities here that we need to consider.
We've got some great comments popping up. Let's say hello to, and I'm bad with people's names. I apologize, Karabo. Let me know if I didn't pronounce or stress that correctly. What I have to notice about design thinking bandwagon has been used as a monetary entryway to those who are probably not critical thinkers. We also have Jason recommending Dr. Richard Paul's video series on CT, I guess that's critical thinking, as he
Critical
puts
thinking,
it,
yep.
yeah, on his as he puts it in the catchy saying, "Thinking about thinking in order to make thinking better."
Yeah.
Which
We use the
sounds
term
good.
metacognition, thinking about thinking.
I like it.
Yep.
And Karabo followed that up with design is about critical thinking at every stage. It should be. It absolutely
It
should
should
be.
be, yeah.
And I should have warned Seth that I now have the emojis people put into the chat room show up all over our faces. So I know
That's
you
kind of
can't
cool. I like
you
that.
can't see what the chat room is saying, but you can see people are giving you applause and happy faces. And
No, it's
earlier
us.
a poop. Earlier we got a poop.
I'm happy with that too.
Right.
Hopefully it was a satisfying poop.
Hopefully some critical thinking went into it.
I'm an old man. Poop is not always a bad thing.
It's a Friday, everybody.
saying.
We're just we're drunk with power.
That's right.
So I wanted to talk to you again about some of the things that sometimes feel like the opposite of critical thinking, so that we can try to recognize this in ourselves and others. Cognitive errors, distortions, biases, and logical fallacies. And I had someone fighting me on LinkedIn the other day, and every time I tried to say something, he was like, "Oh, that's the logical fallacy of cognitive bias," and
Right.
now you're doing a Texas sharpshooter, and I felt like someone had just downloaded a PDF about things and was just trying to say all these words as much as they could.
Yeah.
But as much as these were fun as these words are to say, what about some of the? Do you have anything there that you can talk about? Well, and again, in UX, we talk all the time about cognitive biases and logical fallacies. Do you have something more about cognitive errors and distortions?
Sure, I do. I have lots of stuff.
Yeah, thanks.
Let me start with the most basic, really, because you're right. I mean, people get into so much jargon and so many. It's you can really geek out on this stuff in a way that is frankly totally non-productive, because these are all just artificial terms people have made. They sound great and they're catchy, but it's like listening to people talking about a sporting event or a chess game or something like that. It's all these. I don't find it to be terribly useful. But here's some generic things that you might be thinking about. There are a lot of obstacles and barriers that people have to creative thinking and to critical thinking and to higher order thought processes. And these are all kind of related concepts. Some of these are motivational kinds of blocks. We're cynical, we're arrogant, we just don't feel like putting in the time and energy. We're confident, we're so confident in ourselves that we don't need to bother to process it further. Some of them are emotional. It's late in the day on a Friday, I'm tired, I'm fatigued, I'm anxious, I'm angry. Whatever the thing is, I'm distracted by my own emotions, and so I'm unable to really delve into a critical thought process. Some of them are perceptual, right? Stereotyping, overlooking alternative viewpoints because I'm so kind of blinded by the fact that, I think mine is the only perspective. Defining a problem too narrowly, kind of overlooking other potential explanations for something. Judging rather than evaluating. Some of them are intellectual blocks that people just frankly aren't, they're cognitively sluggish. They're not putting in the effort necessary to be able to kind of do this sort of processing and thinking. So they rely on questionable criteria to evaluate some claims, or they simply take someone's word for it. They don't critically evaluate something. And some of them are cultural. And I think this is one of the things we see a lot on social media. someone who values kind of a macho John Wayne way of thinking, without much reflection on it. Just this is how it is, this is, or fear that competition of ideas is going to harm kind of the social bonding function of some of our false beliefs, because we love our beliefs, and our false beliefs are just as good as our true beliefs because they help us to connect with other people. We can put something out there. It's a way of getting some social capital with people at work or people in our world. And so we're going to connect over that fake news, and we're going to have an emotional reaction to it, and we're all going to feel thank you, Carabo. We're all going to feel like we're sort of in this together, even though we're dead wrong. So I think all of these types of things become everyday problems that all of us struggle with, if we're being really sort of self-aware and really honest about. And so you really have to be in the best possible headspace and super clear to be able to really do this process well, or you're going to end up tripping over yourself at some point or another and falling into some kind of a blind spot or a pit.
Thank you. We've got 2 questions in the chat room, and everyone's burning to get their answers. So let's start with Carolyn or Caroline. Sorry, can't tell from LinkedIn. Joining us from LinkedIn, who says, as a young designer or working professional, how do you balance and employ your critical thinking skills while facing the hierarchy of a company and senior designer or coworker opinions?
Yeah. That touches on so many things that you and I have already talked about a lot.
Yeah, so thing 1, see the playlist that says psychology, because it's a whole bunch of Seth episodes where we go through a lot of that stuff.
Because you may be right, is the thing. I don't care how young you are, you still may be right.
Right.
And that doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to go over well at all. So, as we know, being right is not necessarily a guarantee that you're going to be accepted for that rightness. So sometimes it's about how the message is transmitted and about the politics of the workplace and about the personalities that you have to come across. But I think if you're doing the process and if you're really, again, I think it helps to be intellectually humble. I think it's the opposite of being super confident. I don't think it's saying, I know this to be true. It's saying, I'm pretty sure I've done this right, and I'm feeling like it's taken me in a direction that makes sense to me. I'm open to other possibilities, but logically, this is the one that seems to make the most sense. I think you can safely say you're sitting on the high ground at that point. Now it's a matter of how to sell that so that other people can really kind of take it and absorb it and work with it.
And to me, for Caroline, I think the balance is, or maybe Caroline, maybe balance is about, I think it's important to have confidence. I think too often in UX, we are just so pooped on and disrespected. And obviously, Caroline's dealing with other people's opinions about her job and her work because they want to design pretty things too. And I think that we have to present things with confidence, and I think we have to own our specialty. And I'm afraid that if we get too, I kind of think this, and I think if we end up in an area where we are just too like, hey, I don't want to push too hard, but I kind of think this. I think in UX, it's not supposed to be about us or what we think. It's supposed to be, here's the information we have. This is what the data says. This is what we learned from customers. So I'm suggesting we're going in this direction. And when they have other opinions, I say just document all of it so that when the project is a giant disaster, you can say, I kind of predicted that.
Well, and I think you can actually do your homework and be prepared for that. And I think critical thinking is an ally in that process, because if you've gone through the process of anticipating other ways of doing this, you can say, we considered this, this, and this that you're already putting forth, and here's some of the reasons why those are less of a sensible direction to go right now. I agree with you 100%. There's a difference between being sort of open-minded internally and being confident externally. I think you can if you're overconfident internally, it's a problem. If you're saying to yourself, I'm sure I'm right, internally, then you're being overly rigid as far as I'm concerned in most settings. you can feel good about your results, but we're never sure we're right. But when you present that information to someone, especially in a competitive kind of a workplace, you better be damn sure you know what you're talking about, and you better put it forth in a way that has some level of authority, or you're right, you're going to be dismissed instantly. But if you've done the work up front internally, it should make your sales pitch a whole lot smoother and more effective.
Yes, and we've got Carabo said herd mentality in leaders is what kills young critical thinking.
So true.
We've got a great question from Wilson, and a friend of the show, Wilson, and he says, "What's a good way to practice critical thinking? What can we do to be better at this and do it more often and more betterer?"
I love that. It's such a constructive question. Um, and you had asked me actually in advance of the podcast, Debbie, about, are there ways we can actually help kids with this? Are these things that we can teach people to do from young ages? And by implication, maybe have we not been doing enough of that in the recent past? Dunning-Kruger, love the Dunning-Kruger effect. And hello,
It's
Dr.
Darren.
Hood.
Yes, almost Dr. Hood.
Almost Dr. Hood. So there's a bunch of things that you can do, and I'm going to just throw out some of these. These are things that we can all sort of practice, but also things, frankly, if you've got kids and you want to, or you're around children in any way and you want to help them, or just younger folks, you want to help them kind of get better at this. If you teach, these are things that can sometimes be useful. Helping people and yourself to identify in a message the unstated assumptions and biases and points of view. Where are these people coming from? Why are they promoting this? What is this really about? The underlying subtext to messages is really important, and I think the more you can process that in everyday life, the better you get at it by practice. And you can also find out to some extent how these underlying assumptions can actually undermine the very argument that someone's trying to make. Sometimes they're putting something out and you can tell they're completely blinded to some underlying biases that they've got, and it ends up killing their whole messaging. Debates are terrific. I'm not talking about arguing with someone in the comments of Fox News, but I'm talking about actually having like a real live debate with someone about actual content of something meaningful. And being prepared to argue either side of the issue is a really helpful way. I was on my high school debate team, and that was something on every year, we needed to be prepared to debate both the affirmative and the negative on every issue, and to really be passionate about both. Because arguably, it's not about the content necessarily, it's about the process of learning how to do this. That kind of balance is really important. Learning how to be both kind of sympathetic to something and skeptical of it at the same time is a bit of a weird place to be if you're not used to it. But I think once you've achieved that balance, it's actually really freeing and liberating. Small group discussion, an opportunity to talk with others and really unpack some of these ideas that you're working with, and playing with possibilities on things, talking about, well, what in a crazy world, what if all the computers blew up tomorrow? Then how would we approach this problem? Basically, like coming up with blue sky brainstorming types of ideas and discussions. They might not always be the most productive way to achieve an end goal, right? They're not going to get you the deliverable on time and on budget. But as a process, it can be a really helpful way of starting to kind of think things through as a practice. One thing that I've done a lot of in education and higher ed in college is working with what are called ill-structured problems. These are some of my favorites. These are problems that have no known answer. They have no known solution, and you can't solve them with formal rules of logic or math or things like that. And you're asking people to come up with multiple solutions for these. There was a great book for a while called How Would You Move Mount Fuji? which was actually one of the interview questions that was being used by a fairly large Fortune 500 company. And it forces you to start from the very beginning, because none of us have a plan for that. And so you need to engage a kind of critical thought process that, if you're going to do it in a serious way, I mean, you could be silly about it, but if you're going to be serious about it, you have to actually analyze each of the steps along the way and determine what's the most effective strategy I can think of. If you do this in a small group, you can really end up sharpening some of these analytic skills.
I can also. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say I can recommend some good materials. There's books, and I can give you a list if you want to put it out in print form, because that's probably easier than just reading titles off. But one that I think is amazing. So there's one I love called Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. Great book. Talks about the dichotomy of two different types of thought, the fast, instinctive, emotional thinking, and the slower, more deliberative, more logical thinking. So kind of going back to that original question of how do I stay balanced between kind of first principles and intuition, this might be a really good resource. There's a masterclass that Neil deGrasse Tyson has, which is phenomenal, on scientific thinking and communication. And it gets into all of these ideas of critical thinking, logical fallacies, and scientific method. It's really good. And there's a great one by Daniel Goleman. I'll just mention these, but then there's plenty of others that are out there I can give you titles on. Daniel Goleman's is called Vital Lies, Simple Truths, The Psychology of Self-Deception. Goleman is amazing and very, very good stuff. And he's put out, I think, some really good information that it's not just faulty thinking, it's everyday thinking that all of us do constantly, that we live in a world of self-deception, and in a world of reality. And you need to use critical thinking to be able to navigate those things effectively. So there's plenty more, but those are a couple I can throw out right off the bat that are great.
Yeah, what I keep coming back to, at least for myself, is possible outcomes, is really thinking out possible outcomes. And something that was instilled in me as a kid was not only considering possible outcomes, but also considering with each possible outcome, who wins and who loses. If there are players or people or teams involved, if this were to happen, who benefits, who loses? Are there outcomes where the most people win the most possible? How can we move situations towards those? I got lucky to have some good influences as a young child from a couple of people who believed very strongly in that. And so that was something that I was often thinking about, and still do to this day, is how do we create the best outcomes for the most people? And I think you're not going to get there if you're not engaging in critical thinking.
I would agree.
Oh, guess what?
I would agree. Hey! It does feel a little less intense now.
Thanks. I turned it down. It might still be a bit much, but thank you, Charlene, for the British pound and the heart stickers. Tatiana wants me to list the titles in the chat. Eek. Can you email me those titles, Seth? And Tatiana,
Sure,
I will add them to the, because LinkedIn is so terrible with past videos, I will add them in the YouTube description. So just find the video later in the psychology playlist on Delta CX and YouTube, and I'll get those up there.
In fact, I'll do you one better. I have those. I also have a few others on critical thinking specifically that I think are really good. They're a little more textbook oriented. And the last time you and I were speaking, there was questions about boundaries and do I know any good books about those? And I now do. So I'll give you some of those titles as well.
I'll add those. I'll go back into the archives and add those to the YouTube descriptions. So everybody check the YouTube descriptions for further information. I'll always add stuff there when I can, and sometimes in the future. Quick reminder, since I didn't mention this earlier, but please Won't you please subscribe on YouTube? It's a much more fun world than LinkedIn. And empathize with the like button. Let the YouTube algorithm know you like stuff like this and to drive more people in this direction. Of course, we have our Slack workspace, which is completely free. We have almost 600 people there now. Thank you, Charlene. Charlene says, give us all the books with the prayer hands. Thank you. And of course, the tip jar. Though today, I think we've really gone far with the tip jar. Thank you to Wilson for the $1 Canadian, which has set off the emoji explosion. Thank you. And by the way, you have a special personal thanks from Kayleen. Shout out to Dr. Seth for practicing psychology in school. The kids need it. That's true.
Oh, thank you, Kayleen. Now more than ever.
Yeah, I've been very lucky to have Seth in my life as a friend for decades, and I can only imagine the positive effect he has on children and families everywhere, because I know the positive effect he's had on me, and I'm sure if he's giving even 0.7% of that to these children, their lives are absolutely changing. And I say that sincerely, as you know.
There's serious danger that I'm no longer going to be a low ego action hero if this keeps up.
You are a low ego. You belong here. If you get tired of the whole psychology thing, we'll give you some sort of job here.
It sounds like fun. I can learn coding. I can do that. You guys just do
coding,
right?
We don't code. Oh my God. Oh no. Why? Everyone's going to take back their donations. They're going to be canceled.
I know, right?
Let's see. Caroline was writing down thinking fast and slow. Scientific thinking and communication, vital lies, simple truths. So yeah, we'll get those in the YouTube.
We'll give you all kinds of goodies.
And of course, we only have a few minutes left. Everybody, if you have any last questions or comments, please get them in the chat room so that we can address them before I fall asleep.
Indeed, yeah, it's late for you.
Oh my God, Peaches is here. Peaches, thank you so much. Oh my gosh, Peaches, that must be 5 British pounds, I'm guessing, but I didn't get a message coming up. Thank you, Peaches. Peaches, since Peaches is anonymous and not everybody knows her real name, I will just say, I hope you're finding a better job. There. With love to Peaches.
I will mention, speaking of my working in psychology, but who knows, maybe someday in UX. I feel like I am part-time at this point. If anybody does want to hook up on LinkedIn, I'm there. I'm Dr. Seth Finkle, and some of you already have, which is great.
Yes, Wilson was posting to the Slack channel like, oh my God, Dr. Seth is following me on LinkedIn. He was like all excited.
I do. And I actually do. I don't have a lot of time to spend on LinkedIn or other platforms, but I do actually occasionally check in on what's going on in the CX UX world. So
thank you.
Yep.
Because you feel responsible now for all of us.
No, because it's fascinating. I love this stuff.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for being part of it. And Wilson says, thank you. So if anyone has last questions or thoughts, let us know. Kayleen has one coming through now. Oh, this is a beautiful question. I'm always so thrilled to see stuff that Kayleen says.
Great questions.
We have great audience. I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah.
Kayleen says, dealing with your own emotions, other people's emotions, thoughts, etc., can be exhausting. Dr. Seth, do you recommend any daily rituals?
Oh my God, I'm going to cry. That's such a beautiful question.
I know. I love
that.
Kayleen.
I love that. It's fantastic.
Hold on. Hearts for Kayleen. Okay.
That's wonderful. Sure. Yeah. I mean, personal daily rituals, I have plenty. Most of them are now kind of in mothballs because I'm back to working in a brick and mortar building most of the time. But I would say, especially for people who are used to working in a digital world, and right now all of us are living in a digital world for the most part as well. I'd say outdoors is important. Daily ritual for me, I don't spend a lot of time outside. I'm connected to my devices constantly. But the more time you can take just a few moments for that, I try to, it sounds sort of cliche to say that I'm a meditator, because I don't really, but I do have some moments of quietude where I'll just sort of be still, where I'm not thinking. And after all of this talk of critical thinking, it is exhausting. And sometimes you need to just rest that. And we can do that in idiotic ways, right? And we all have our range of idiotic ways that we do that. But sometimes it's really refreshing to just do nothing, absolutely nothing. And I try to make that a piece of my, it's not a long piece of my day, but it's a piece of every day where I can. And I think a certain amount of actual communication with other humans that's not about work or about logistics. I think all of these things are really, really important. And I'm a big fan of caring for stuff that isn't you. So I like to, we have a goldfish, we have some guinea pigs. I like to spend some time just saying hi to them. And just sort of sitting with family or with a pet, or just outside watching the birds or something, just to kind of connect with things that are not me and are not in my head, but are actually in our world. I think those sorts of tangible things are great. I see a sad face.
That was Charlene. She
Ooh.
said, I tried to do nothing, but then suddenly phones appear in my hand.
Oh, yes. I know that story.
Yeah. Caroline says, great book about silence. Silence in the Age of Noise by Erling Kagge, Kagge.
I'll be checking that out.
Yeah. As for me, Kayleen, I think a lot of people know that I spend a lot of time doing what I call talking to dogs. And, try to spend at least half hour or more a day outside talking to the dogs and giving them super rubs and scratches. And they're a lot of fun, and they're on Instagram, so you can follow the dogs on Instagram. And sorry, Darren, I put your question on a list and then forgot to put it up. I am so sorry. And one from Wilson also. Oops. And then when I still lived in America, sometimes I would just get on my motorcycle and ride and put some loud music in the helmet and sing really loud and just kind of be with wind and music. I missed a couple of questions. So are you okay to run a little bit late so we can answer these?
I don't have any hot dates right now. It's all good.
Oh, your hot date's probably in the kitchen.
She is. She's actually right behind me. Yeah.
Right. Hey, hi, hot date. And that face is also from Charlene. So sorry, I missed a question earlier from Darren, who said, does Dr. Seth have any thoughts about the Foundation for Critical Thinking, criticalthinking.org? And I put that into Google when he asked it, and the first thing that came up was lawsuit. But are you familiar with the Foundation for Critical Thinking?
It sounds like I'm pleased to say I am not. I am unfamiliar with said foundation, but I will definitely check it out. That sounds. It sounds like it'll be fun. No, I am unfamiliar with their particular work.
Yes, or lawsuit.
But I will be Googling that, and I will be looking into their. Maybe I can represent them and get my law degree, and I don't know.
Maybe you can be expert witness. Well, Darren, maybe you can tell us what you think of them. Yeah, maybe Darren, tell us what you think of them. Well, we put up Wilson's question from before. Wilson, sorry,
Indeed.
I forgot to address this one. Wilson said, why do people speak in code? Why can't people speak their mind and directly say what they want?
Wouldn't that be so much nicer? Hell yeah, Wilson. Like that's I don't get people. I'm literally a
You're
psychologist.
fired.
I don't get people. People make no sense sometimes. So I will say I worked for about 10 years in a non-public residential school for kids who literally almost every child there had Asperger's or some form of autism. And there were huge numbers of people on the autism spectrum, including a number of staff. And it was a fascinating experience working with these young adults. And one of the things I learned was I love autistic people because they make sense. They say what they think, they speak their mind, it's very clean, it all kind of works. There's no playing around with, the code. They don't get code, so they don't do code. It's very direct. It was the most refreshing decade, I have to say. And I got to a point where I could not talk to people who were neurotypical. I couldn't have conversations with people who weren't on the spectrum because they stopped making any sense at all to me. So I'm right there with you, Wilson. If people could only just say what they meant, this world would be a whole lot simpler.
So true. So true. And everybody, don't forget to check the live podcasts episodes playlist. We did UX and autism a few weeks ago with Sean McSharry, who is autistic, and we learned a lot about his perspectives as someone who's worked in UX, I think, over 20 years. So I like to say UX certainly welcomes people on the autism spectrum. It's a pretty good match.
It was a great episode. Yeah, I would definitely encourage people to check it out. I did. It's great.
Dr. Seth, I didn't know you're watching our show. I thought you were just being on the show.
No, I like to watch it. I like to see what the soon-to-be Dr. Hood has to say, and what No, there's some. You have some great people. They're fun and entertaining and smart. It's always fun to watch.
We have a hilarious one scheduled that I really want to encourage everybody to mark their calendars for. If you watched our first episode of the year with Stephanie Walter and Ben Smithwell, blah, blah, as we totally made fun of 2021 predictions, Stephanie will not be joining us, but Ben will be back later in the month on Monday, April 26th for an episode we're calling What Isn't Design Thinking? And we are going to walk through, we have been Googling for weeks, and we are going to walk through every definition we have found of design thinking and give some snarky responses to it, because it looks like, as far as we can tell, everything's design thinking. What isn't?
I would love to see what makes the cut and is not. That would be great.
He even found that there were some countries that were trying to reimagine their poop and sewer systems with design thinking.
Marshmallow peeps are not design thinking.
Someone prove him wrong. Well, let's get our debate hats on.
Prove me wrong.
Okay, hold on. Debate hats. Marshmallow peeps have empathy for you, Seth. Marshmallow peeps feel you deeply. And marshmallow peeps understand your problems. And marshmallow peeps ideate. Marshmallow peeps.
I'm feeling a lot better about them now. Here's a shout out to all of those peeps.
So there you go. Solomon says, I practice describing things in simple, honest, direct language. It makes communication more efficient. It's one of the many reasons I'm a fan of Solomon.
Absolutely.
Kayleen says, marshmallow peeps do not understand me. Or maybe just peeps in general.
I'm with you.
So that's a good. I'll have to ask that to Ben when he's here. Our marshmallow.
There's got to be a way to work that into the topic.
Thinking.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a good one. Well, okay. Any last questions or thoughts? Let us know. But everybody, put on your critical thinking hats and keep. Even when the people around us aren't doing critical thinking, we've got to keep doing it. We are the shepherds of the critical thinking. Seth, any final words here in the critical thinking universe?
In the critical thinking universe? No, my only, we've been at this for a while. My only thought would be, keep throwing those cool things into Debbie's tip jar and making her screen explode. That's awesome. No,
it wasn't even working for weeks. I've had that on and it didn't work.
It's so cool. No, I think honestly, in all seriousness, this is one of those things that people tend to kind of put in a silo, and they're like, we're gonna do critical thinking. It's like we're gonna do empathy. It's, in theory, if you're doing it right, it's something that you're doing as a part of your daily life. It's part of the integration of all of the thoughts that you're having. It's a lens through which you're viewing things skeptically, and being a scientist in everything you do. I honestly think, hey,
Thank you,
I think it's,
Darren.
thank you, Darren. I think it's one of those things that if the world moves in a really positive direction, we're going to see more and more people not just talking about critical thinking, but actually beginning to implement it and using it more effectively.
Thank you, Kayleen.
You're gonna be able to buy a car at the end of this episode. This is great.
I don't think so. I'm going to stick with cheese, but but the funny thing is, I think this mostly works with you because we had like a serious author on a couple of weeks ago, and some of the emoji were coming up, and he looked at it and he's kind of like, look at that. And I don't think he had this supreme love for the silliness that we have here. And I should probably
it's phenomenal.
I think I should warn my guests. I know you'll roll with it because you're improv comedy guy, but like I think I got to warn some of my guests a little bit more.
Or totally don't. I think it's so much better if it just randomly pops up on the screen and they're like, what the hell is going on with my computer? And you tell them, I don't see that. That's not on my screen.
Oh, that's good. Oh, that's wait, is that gaslighting? Hold on, let's go back to it. I think that's
absolutely gaslighting.
Yeah, I think that's
exactly
gaslighting. And
which episode number was that again?
I don't remember. I don't. I have some of them memorized, but not that one. Let me go into my YouTube channel. I've got a good search feature. Gaslighting, episode 65. We had Seth on for recognizing gaslighting and being set up to fail at work. So you can go back and find that. Charlene says, warn them about our craziness, and put up that smiley face. Well, everybody, if you have a subject you would like Dr. Seth to conquer, let us know what it is. You can always send me a note or make a comment under this YouTube video. I read all of them, especially because I have to remove all of the Russian porn spam every day at 8 in the morning. And how YouTube can't figure that out with their algorithm, I don't know.
Is that on your resume?
Proficient at... Yep.
One of the action items that was part of this job.
Proficient at removing Russian porn spam. How does their algorithm not know by now? But yes, if you have something you'd like to hear Seth talk about, especially that falls into his expertise in psychology or possibly jazz, put it in the YouTube comments or send it over to me through the Slack channel, and we will rope him into another episode. Oh, we've got one more question from Carabo. Let's take a look.
Late breaking question.
I know, and then we're going to have to say goodnight, everybody. My last question for Dr. Finkle is, how do you apply critical thinking when designing for people who have accessibility issues in a digital world? So applying critical
the whole
thinking...
inclusive design question.
Applying critical thinking to people with disabilities or accessibility needs. What can we do better with our critical thinking?
Right. So, I mean, I my whole career is working with people who have disabilities. So, I think so. To state the absolute obvious at the very outset of everything we're the end of what we're doing here, I think you ask people with accessibility issues about their lives, and you listen carefully, and you think about the things they're telling you, and then you attempt to revisit some of your design assumptions, and perhaps maybe recognize that some of those assumptions are erroneous, because there's lots of things that we take for granted that as people who have use of all of their limbs and don't have accessibility issues, have no sensory issues that are neurotypical. We folk are pretty lucky that we don't have to think about these things. But whether you're talking about that, or you're talking about representation around race and ethnicity or language or LGBTQ issues, all of these things are assumptions that we all kind of make, that our own vantage point is the center of the universe. We all do it. There's nothing wrong with it. That's the nature of humanity. But I think what you do, at least what I would recommend doing, is expand beyond that horizon by actually hearing what other people's experiences are like. And that's to me, that's the beauty of what UX does and can do is, and it's why I've been so kind of on fire about this since you first talked with me about what you do, Deb, and interviewed me for your book. Was I love the idea that there's someone out there in the world of design and tech and corporate life who's actually interested in the lives of us regular people, and including some people who have very different experiences than the folks sitting around a desk in a boardroom somewhere. So I think those kinds of quantitative and even more importantly qualitative data that you guys gather, I think that's vital, and not everyone's going to want to hear it, but I think you have an ethical obligation to continue to sell it. I think that's the good work you guys are doing in the world.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I would add that we have to go beyond talking about these people and really include them in the research and the testing. I know for some companies they're not even talking about those people, so that's a first step. But then we've got to be including people with all kinds of situational, temporary, and permanent disabilities or issues in everything we're doing. As I'm saying in my new talk to engineers, that the product shouldn't go live if people with all types of issues cannot use it intuitively. It should stay in the oven and keep baking and keep getting development and testing and so on if it can't be used by everybody. Kayleen says 10 points to qualitative research, and Wilson says, hell yeah, when gave you the applause emoji that sailed on by. So I guess I'm going to play us out of here. Thanks for coming back and staying late. Thanks to a very active chat room and a very generous chat room. I think this one wins for donations. I guess, the power of exploding strange emoji. So thank you to the service I use that provides that, because it's not YouTube. And Seth, I hope we'll have you back again in another month or so when we come up with another topic.
I'd love that. And we'll be doing a track and stuff on concentric. So there'll be some cool stuff coming that way as well.
That's right.
So you'll be seeing me.
Yeah, let me mention to everybody that I'm going to be posting this next week on LinkedIn, but we're going to be holding a multi-day conference. We got cheese from Darren. Thank you.
Nice.
We're going to be holding a multi-day conference in late May, and Seth was the chair of one of the tracks. Darren was a chair of one of the tracks. So there's going to be some really great speakers and stuff coming up. I'm still planning it. The website's not ready. The registration isn't ready, but I'm hoping in the next week or two we'll open it up. For now, block off your calendar, May 25, 26, and 27. I should give you the times. America times, 11 in the morning Eastern to 3 p.m., I think, are the times on that day. Translate it for where you are. We'll have some networking and mentoring before and after. More on that when my website's ready. I don't want to go too early, but you'll see Seth again soon there. I'm going to play us out of here and roll right into bed. It's almost midnight here. So Seth, have a great weekend. Be safe. And everybody else, wear your mask. And we'll see you all Monday. Thanks.
Thanks, Debbie. Bye, everybody.
Delta CX, available for CX and UX consulting, projects, and training. Contact us for a free consultation.